This is Book 8 of John Dryden's translation of the Aeneid. So to start this book, Turnus will prepare his men for battle and call Diomedes for aid. You might remember Diomedes from the Iliad if you have read that. He is an Achaean. Next, the Tiber, which is the god of the Tiber River, will encourage Aeneas and confirm that he has in fact arrived in his destined home. Aeneas will travel to and be welcomed by Evander, a king of the Tuscans, and his son Pallas. Next, Aeneas and the Tuscans will celebrate the feast of Hercules, who is referred to as Alcides more often than not. Aeneas will get a tour of Evander's city, Pallanteum, which will be the site of future Rome, so the Roman audience would recognize many sites that are seen by Aeneas. At Venus's request, Vulcan will agree to make armor for Aeneas. Evander will send Aeneas off with his own men, including his son Pallas. And finally, Aeneas will receive his new armor from Venus and gaze at the shield which depicts the great feats of his progeny or his descendants. So a lot of shout-outs to the Iliad in this book. Here we go. This is Book 8 of the Aeneid by Virgil, translated by John Dryden. When Turnus had assembled all his powers, his standard planted on Laurentum's towers, when now the sprightly trumpet from afar had given the signal of approaching war, he roused the neighing steeds to scour the fields, while the fierce riders clattered on their shields. Trembling with rage, the Latian youth prepared to join the allies, and headlong rushed to war. Fierce Ufens and Messapus led the crowd, with bold Mezentius, who blasphemed aloud. These through the country took their wasteful course, the fields to forage, and to gather force. Then Venulus to Diomed they send, to beg his aid Ausonia to defend, declare the common danger, and inform the Grecian leader of the growing storm. Aeneas, landed on the Latian coast, with banished gods and with a baffled host, yet now aspired to conquest of the state, and claimed the title from the gods and fate. What numerous nations in his quarrel came, and how they spread his formidable name. What he designed, what mischief might arise, if fortune favored his first enterprise, was left for him to weigh, whose equal fears and common interest was involved in theirs. While Turnus and the allies thus urged the war, the Trojan, floating in a flood of care, beholds the tempest which his foes prepare. This way and that he turns his anxious mind, thinks, and rejects the counsels he designed, explores himself in vain, in every part, and gives no rest to his distracted heart. So when the sun by day or moon by night strike on the polished brass their trembling light, the glittering species here and there divide, and cast their dubious beams from side to side, now on the walls, now on the pavement play, until the ceiling flash the glaring day. 'Twas at night, and weary nature lulled asleep the birds of air, and fishes of the deep, and beasts and mortal men. The Trojan chief was laid on Tiber's banks, oppressed with grief, and found in silent slumber late relief. Then, through the shadows of the poplar wood, arose the father of the Roman flood. An azure robe was o'er his body spread, a wreath of shady reeds adorned his head. Thus, manifest to sight, the god appeared, and with these pleasing words his sorrow cheered. Undoubted offspring of ethereal race, O long expected in this promised place, who through the foes hast borne thy banished gods, restored them to their hearths and old abodes. This is thy happy home, the clime where fate ordains thee to restore the Trojan state. Fear not, the war shall end in lasting peace, and all the rage of haughty Juno cease. And that this nightly vision may not seem the effect of fancy or an idle dream, a sow beneath an oak shall lie along, all white herself, and white her 30 young. When 30 rolling years have run their race, thy son Ascanius on this empty space shall build a royal town, of lasting fame, which from this omen shall receive the name. Time shall approve the truth, For what remains, and how with sure success to crown thy pains, with patience next attend. A banished band, driven with Evander from the Arcadian land, hath planted here, and placed on high their walls. Their town the founder Pallanteum calls, derived from Pallas, his great-grandsire's name. But the fierce Latians old possession claim, with war infesting the new colony. These make thy friends, and on their aid rely. To thy free passage I submit my streams. Wake, son of Venus, from thy pleasing dreams, and when the setting stars are lost in day, to Juno's power thy just devotion pay. With sacrifice the wrathful queen appease. Her pride at length shall fall, her fury cease. When thou return'st victorious from the war, perform thy vows to me with grateful care. The god am I, whose yellow water flows around these fields, and fattens as it goes. Tiber my name, among the rolling floods, renowned on earth, esteemed among the gods. This is my certain seat. In times to come my waves shall wash the walls of mighty Rome. He said, and plunged below. While yet he spoke, his dream Aeneas and his sleep forsook. He rose, and looking up, beheld the skies with purple blushing and the day arise. Then water in his hollow palm he took from Tiber's flood, and thus the powers bespoke. Laurentian nymphs, by whom the streams are fed, and Father Tiber, in thy sacred bed receive Aeneas, and from danger keep. Whatever fount, whatever holy deep conceals thy watery stores, where'er they rise, and bubbling from below, salute the skies. Thou king of horned floods, whose plenteous urn suffices fatness to the fruitful corn, for this thy kind compassion of our woes shalt share my morning song and evening vows. But oh, be present to thy people's aid, and firm the gracious promise thou hast made. Okay, so we have two distinct scenes going on at the beginning of Book 8, and the first one involves Turnus. Turnus puts his standard, his flag, on Laurentum's towers, and so he's staking his authority in the area. He calls a trumpet, and he gathers support from the surrounding Latian youths. So this involves three people who will prove to be important: Ufens, Messapus, and Mezentius. But they need more help, and so they call for the famous Diomedes. And again, if you're familiar with the Iliad, he will sound very familiar, a very strong, successful Greek warrior. And he has come to Italy, and they want his help in fighting these darn Trojans. And so they go, specifically Venulus goes, to try to encourage Diomedes to fight this common foe. And while they're doing that, Aeneas is watching, and his mind is anxious. He's trying to decide what to do. Virgil compares him to sunlight or moonlight that shines on polished brass or on the wall and then on the pavement, on the ceiling. And so the light is kind of scattering everywhere, like it's playing and dancing all over the place. And so is Aeneas's mind. He's dancing over all sorts of different ideas. That's not a good idea. Maybe this. I'm not sure. And so he tries to just get some solace in sleep. So he's sleeping on the river Tiber's banks, and in his dream, the god of the Tiber River appears and says, "This is the place. This is the clime where fate ordains thee to restore the Trojan state. This is where you're going to rebuild Troy." And he tells him later that it's going to be called Rome, line 90 there. So throughout this speech from Tiber, he says several things. The first one he says is, so that you know that this is not just some random dream, that this is a legitimate dream, I'm going to give you a sign, or I'll predict a sign that you'll see. You'll see an all-white mama pig with 30 young feeding on her. So 30 little piglets feeding on an all-white mama pig. And when you see that, you'll know it's a sign that in 30 years, your son will build a royal town of lasting fame here. This would be actually Alba Longa. And Rome would be yet in the future to be built by Romulus and Remus. He then gives a few suggestions how to be successful in this war. And so the first one he says is go and find Evander. Evander was, according to legend, the one who brought Greek culture to Italy originally. And so he has come and founded Pallanteum, and Aeneas needs to go and make his ally. So that's the first thing he needs to do. He also needs to make sure to appease Juno. As soon as all of this war is over, she will need to be appeased. And also, while he's at it, he should make sacrifices to Tiber as well. And so Aeneas wakes up and says to the powers of the Tiber River that he thanks them for their kindness, for their aid, and vows that they will always be part of the sacrifices of his people. Picking up in line 109. Thus having said, 2 galleys from his stores with care he chooses, mans, and fits with oars. Now on the shore the fatal swine is found. Wondrous to tell, she lay along the ground, her well-fed offspring at her udders hung, she white herself, and white her 30 young. Aeneas takes the mother and her brood, and all on Juno's altar are bestowed. The following night and the succeeding day, propitious Tiber smoothed his watery way. He rolled his river back, and poised he stood, a gentle swelling and a peaceful flood. The Trojans mount their ships, they put from shore, borne on the waves, and scarcely dip an oar. Shouts from the land give omen to their course, and the pitched vessels glide with easy force. The woods and waters wonder at the gleam of shields and painted ships that stem the stream. One summer's night and one whole day they pass betwixt the green wood shades and cut the liquid glass. The fiery sun had finished half his race, looked back, and doubted in the middle space, when they from far beheld the rising towers, the tops of sheds, the shepherds' lowly bowers, thin as they stood, which then of homely clay, now rise in marble from the Roman sway. These cots, Evander's kingdom, mean and poor, the Trojan saw, and turned his ships to shore. It was on a solemn day, the Arcadian states, the king and prince, without the city gates, then paid their offerings in a sacred grove to Hercules, the warrior son of Jove. Thick clouds of rolling smoke involve the skies, and fat of entrails on his altar fries. But when they saw the ships that stemmed the flood, and glittered through the covert of the wood, they rose with fear, and left the unfinished feast, till dauntless Pallas reassured the rest to pay the rites. Himself without delay a javelin seized, and singly took his way. Then gained a rising ground, and called from far, Resolve me, strangers, whence and what you are, your business here, and bring you peace or war? High on the stern Aeneas stand, and held a branch of olive in his hand, while thus he spoke. The Phrygians' arms, you see, expelled from Troy, provoked in Italy by Latian foes, with war unjustly made, at first affianced, and at last betrayed. This message bear. The Trojans and their chief bring holy peace, and beg the king's relief. Struck with so great a name and all on fire, the youth replies, Whatever you require, your fame exacts. Upon our shores descend, a welcome guest, and what you wish, a friend. He said, and downward hasting to the strand, embraced the stranger prince, and joined his hand. Conducted to the grove, Aeneas broke the silence first, and thus the king bespoke. Best of the Greeks, to whom by fate's command I bear these peaceful branches in my hand. Undaunted I approach you, though I know your birth is Grecian, and your land my foe. From Atreus though your ancient lineage came, and both the brother kings your kindred claim, yet my self-conscious worth, your high renown, your virtue through the neighboring nations blown, our fathers' mingled blood, Apollo's voice, have led me hither, less by need than choice. Our founder Dardanus, as fame has sung, and Greeks acknowledge, from Electra sprung. Electra from the loins of Atlas came, Atlas whose head sustains the starry frame. Your sire is Mercury, whom long before on cold Cylene's top fair Maia bore. Maia the fair, on fame if we rely, was Atlas' daughter, who sustains the sky. Thus from one common source our streams divide. Ours is the Trojan, yours the Aredian side. Raised by these hopes, I sent no news before, nor asked your leave, nor did your faith implore, but come without a pledge, my own ambassador. The same Rutulians who with arms pursued the Trojan race are equal foes to you. Our host expelled, what farther force can stay the victor troops from universal sway? Then will they stretch their power athwart the land, and either sea from side to side command. Receive our offered faith, and give us thine. Ours is a generous and experienced line. We want not hearts nor bodies for the war. In council cautious, and in fields we dare. Okay, so the section starts with Aeneas having given these promises to the Tiber River, along with all the other nymphs and so on that live in the river. And he now gets 2 ships to go and set out for the land of Evander. And as he's going, look what he sees on the shore. Almost immediately he sees this pure white sow with 30 young feeding on her. And so the sign confirms it, and he knows that the Tiber was sincere and that he will find this ally as he continues on his journey. And so Tiber helps them on their way, and they're continuing. The sun is about halfway up the sky on the second day when what do they see but these sheds, rising towers, and shepherds' lowly dwellings. And they look really not shabby, but it doesn't look anything like modern Rome. So later this will be Rome, we're being told. But it was a poor and mean kingdom at that point. And so the Trojans see it, and the people there from the Arcadian states are all in the midst of this sacred ceremony to Hercules. And they see the ships coming in, and they're freaked out enough that they want to stop their ceremony. And Pallas, who we'll see as Evander's son, says, "Don't worry, I'll take care of this." He grabs a spear, and he dauntless goes to these strangers and asks them quickly, "Who are you? Where'd you come from? And what do you want? Do you bring peace or war? A man of business." So Aeneas comes, raises an olive branch, a sign of peace, and says, "Hey, we're Trojans. We're here betrayed by our Latian foes unjustly, and we have a message that we seek peace and beg the king's relief." Well, very quickly, Pallas says, "Oh, you're the Trojans. Yes, we've heard all about you. Whatever you need, you have found a friend here." And so Pallas takes Aeneas to the grove where King Evander is. Aeneas and Evander meet, and Aeneas speaks first. "You are the best of Greeks, and we know you're Greeks. However, we also know that we have a common lineage prior to that point." Line 176, "Our fathers' mingled blood" is part of this. So all of these things have led us here, and he lists them all. But specifically, he says, their founder, Dardanus, comes from Electra, who comes from Atlas. Your people come from Mercury, equivalent to Hermes. And Mercury came from Maia, and Maia came from Atlas as well. And thus, we both come from Atlas, ultimately. And because of this, I came expecting peace, and I come to ask your help against the Rutulians, our common foe. If they defeat us, there's nothing that will stop them from universal power, rulership. They will rule from coast to coast athwart the land in Italy and either sea, the Tyrrhenian and the Adriatic seas. They'll have control of all of the area. And so we just want your help. Line 201. He said, and while spoke with piercing eyes, Evander viewed the man with vast surprise, pleased with his action, ravished with his face, then answered briefly with a royal grace. O valiant leader of the Trojan line, in whom the features of thy father shine, how I recall Anchises, how I see his motions mean in all my friend and thee. Long though it be, it is fresh within my mind, when Priam to his sister's court designed a welcome visit with a friendly stay, and through the Arcadian kingdom took his way. Then past the boy the callow down began to shade my chin, and call me first a man. I saw the shining train with vast delight, and Priam's goodly person pleased my sight. But great Anchises, far above the rest, with awful wonder fired my youthful breast. I longed to join in friendship's holy bands our mutual hearts, and plight our mutual hands. I first accosted him, I sued, I sought, and with a loving force to Phineus brought. He gave me, when at length constrained to go, a Lycian quiver and a Cnossian bow, a vest embroidered, glorious to behold, and 2 rich bridles with their bits of gold, which my sons' coursers in obedience hold. The league you ask, I offer, as your right. And when tomorrow's sun reveals the light, with swift supplies you shall be sent away. Now celebrate with us this solemn day, whose holy rites admit no long delay. Honor our annual feast, and take your seat with friendly welcome at a homely treat. Thus having said, the bowls, removed for fear, the youths replaced, and soon restored the cheer. On sods of turf he set the soldiers round, a maple throne, raised higher from the ground, received the Trojan chief, and o'er the bed a lion's shaggy hide for ornament they spread. The loaves were served in canisters, the wine in bowls. The priests renewed the rites divine. Broiled entrails are their food, and beef's continued chine. But when the rage of hunger was repressed, thus spoke Evander to his royal guest. These rites, these altars, and this feast, O king, from no vain fears or superstition spring, or blind devotion, or from blinder chance, or handy zeal, or brutal ignorance, but saved from danger with a grateful sense, the labors of a god we recompense. See from afar yon rock that meets the sky, about whose feet such heaps of rubbish lie, such indigested ruin. Bleak and bare, how desert now it stands, exposed in air. It was once a robber's den, enclosed around with living stone, and deep beneath the ground. The monster Caucasus, more than half a beast, this hold, impervious to the sun, possessed. The pavement ever foul with human gore. Heads and their mangled members hung the door. Vulcan this plague begot, and like his sire, black clouds he belched, and flakes of livid fire. Time, long expected, eased us of our load, and brought the needful presence of a god. The avenging force of Hercules, from Spain arrived in triumph, from Geryon slain. Thrice lived the giant, and thrice lived in vain. His prize, the lowing herds, Alcides drove near Tiber's bank to graze the shady grove. Allured with hope of plunder, and intent by force to rob, by fraud to circumvent, the brutal Caucasus, as by chance they strayed, 4 oxen thence, and 4 fair kine conveyed. And lest the printed footsteps might be seen, he dragged him backwards to his rocky den. The tracks averse a lying notice gave, and led the searcher backward from the cave. Meantime the herdsman hero shifts his place to find fresh pasture and untrodden grass. The beasts who missed their mates filled all around with bellowings, and the rocks restored the sound. One heifer who had heard her love complain roared from the cave and made the project vain. Alcides found the fraud. With rage he shook and tossed about his head his knotted oak. Swift as the winds or Scythian arrow's flight, he clomb with eager haste the aerial height. All right. So Evander, as Aeneas has spoken, looks at Aeneas and just is filled with affection for him. He reminds him of his father, Alcides, And when Evander was a boy, Priam, the former king of Troy, and he visited the kingdom when Evander was young, and he brought with him Anchises. He saw Anchises and was just filled with awe and respect for him. He found him and they became friends. They exchanged gifts. And even some of the gifts that he gave are in use at this very moment, the bits in the horse's mouth of his son. And so, because of that, because Anchises, Aeneas' father, was such a friend to him, he will offer friendship without hesitation. And then he goes on to explain what's going on here. Why are we here? We are celebrating with wine and with festivities, not for ignorance reason, not for simple superstition, because a god, Hercules, visited us once and saved us. There's this monster Caucasus, who was a fire-breathing giant, a son of Vulcan or Hephaestus, and he belched black clouds and livid fire, line 263, and his cave was always strewn with human bodies. He was a terror to us. Well, Hercules was coming from Spain, having just killed the Gyrian and inherited these herds as his reward. And so Alcides, Hercules, came to this Tiber's bank, and he was intent on just letting his new herds graze there. Well, Caucasus looked out and saw these herds, and 4 of the oxen happened to stray from the rest, and Caucasus captured them and took them back to his cave. But he took them backwards so that their prints looked like they were going the opposite way from the cave toward the grove. And this fooled the hero at first. Hercules didn't know where they were. However, one of the cows missed her mate that had been taken, and so filled all of the surrounding rocks with her bellowings. And as a result, the ox starts bellowing, and Alcides, Hercules, can track down Caucasus. So we'll see what happens. Line 289. Then first we saw the monster mend his pace, fear his eyes and paleness in his face, confess the god's approach. Trembling he springs, as terror had increased his feet with wings, nor stayed for stairs, but down the depth he threw his body, on his back and door he drew. The door a rib of living rock, with pains his father hewed it out, and bound with iron chains. He broke the heavy links, the mountain closed, and bars and levers to his foe opposed. The wretch had hardly made his dungeon fast, the fierce avenger came with bounding haste, surveyed the mouth of the forbidden hold, and here and there his raging eyes he rolled. He gnashed his teeth, and thrice he compassed round with winged speed the circuit of the ground. Thrice at the cavern's mouth he pulled in vain, and panting, thrice desisted from his pain. A pointed flinty rock, all bare and black, grew gibbous from behind the mountain's back. Owls, ravens, all ill omens of the night, here built their nests, and hither winged their flight. The leaning head hung threatening o'er the flood, and nodded to the left. The hero stood averse, with planted feet, and from the right tugged at the solid stone with all his might. Thus heaved, the fixed foundations of the rock gave way. Heaven echoed at the rattling shock. Tumbling, it choked the flood. On either side the banks leap backwards, and the streams divide. The sky shrunk upward with unusual dread, and trembling Tiber dived beneath his bed. The court of Caucasus stands revealed to sight. The cavern glares with new admitted light. So the pent vapors with a rumbling sound heave from below and rend the hollow ground. A sounding flaw succeeds, and from on high the gods with hate beheld the nether sky. The ghosts repine at violated night, and curse the invading sun, and sicken at the sight. The graceless monster, caught in open day, and closed and in despair to fly away, howls horrible from underneath, and fills his hollow palace with unmanly yells. The hero stands above, and from afar plies him with darts and stones in distant war. He from his nostrils' huge mouth expires black clouds of smoke amidst his father's fires, gathering with each repeated blast the night, to make uncertain aim and erring sight. The wrathful god then plunges from above, and where in thickest waves the sparkle strove, there lights, and wades through fumes and gropes his way, half singed, half stifled, till he grasps his prey. The monster, spewing fruitless flames, he found. He squeezed his throat, he writhed his neck around, and in a knot his crippled members bound. Then from their sockets tore his burning eyes, rolled on a heap, the breathless robber lies. The doors, unbarred, receive the rushing day, and thorough lights disclose the ravished prey. The bulls, redeemed, breathe open air again. Next by the feet they drag him from his den. The wondering neighborhood with glad surprise behold his shagged breast, his giant size, his mouth that flames no more, and his extinguished eyes. From that auspicious day, with rites divine, we worship at the hero's holy shrine. So the deed of Hercules is recounted. Hercules came to the cave of Cacus, and Cacus barred himself in, put up all his gates, and tried to hide from Hercules, the maddened god. Hercules, became a god later on, was honored because he was so successful as a demigod. So Hercules shows up, he tries to get in, gnashing his teeth and pulling in vain at the cavern's mouth, and can't do it. He stops, tries again, does this 3 times, but then looks and sees a flinty rock that grew gibbous, so it peeked from behind the mountain's back. And all these birds had built their nests up there, and he stood there with planted feet and tugged at the solid stone with all his might. Finally gave way, came tumbling down, and because of this action, the cave of Cacus is exposed. So light pours in. It's almost like when these pent-up vapors from underground rumble and then come out, and light sees a spot that it hasn't seen, and so the gods can see into the underworld. The ghosts see the light, and nobody likes it. It's an unnatural thing, and so it is when Cacus Cave is exposed. So he howls, his hollow palace with unmanly yells is filled, line 332. So Hercules stands above the cave now and throws darts and stones at Cacus, and Cacus breathes smoke more and more heavily so that it becomes dark as night again in the cave. Well, Hercules is so upset by Cacus' evil deed that he goes through, wading through the pitch dark smoke until he finally finds Cacus, and he squeezes his throat and rides his neck around and ties his limbs into a knot, tears out his eyes, and Cacus remains in a heap. Hercules throws open the doors, and the oxen are able to go out of the cave, taking their former captor with them. So Cacus is shown to all of the people. They see his giant size, this monstrous figure who Hercules had saved them from. So that is why we worship. That's the story, line 357. Potetius first ordained these annual vows. As priests were added the Panarian house, who raised this altar in the sacred shade, where honors ever due for ever shall be paid. For these deserts and this high virtue shown, ye warlike youths, your heads with garlands crown, fill high the goblets with a sparkling flood, and with deep draughts invoke our common God. This said, a double wreath evander twined, and poplars black and white his temples bind. Then brims his ample bowl. With like design the rest invoke the gods with sprinkled wine. Meantime the sun descended from the skies, and the bright evening star began to rise. And now the priests, Potetius at their head, and skins of beasts involved, the long procession led. Held high the flaming tapers in their hands, as custom had prescribed their holy bands. Then with a second course the tables load, and with full chargers offer to the god. The Salis sing, and cense his altars round with sob and smoke, their heads with poplar bound. one choir of old, another of the young, to dance and bear the burthen of the song. The lay records the labors and the praise and all the immortal acts of Hercules. First, how the mighty babe, when swathed in bands, the serpent strangled with his infant hands. Then, as in years and matchless force he grew, the Oechalian walls and Trojan overthrew. Besides, 1,000 hazards they relate, procured by Juno's and Eurystheus' hate. Thy hands, unconquered hero, could subdue the cloud-born centaurs and the monster crew, nor thy resistless arm the bull withstood, nor he, the roaring terror of the wood, the triple porter of the Stygian seat, with lolling tongue lay fawning at thy feet, and seized with fear forgot his mangled meat. The infernal waters trembled at thy sight. Thee, God, no face of danger could affright. Not huge Typhoeus, nor the unnumbered snake, increase with hissing head in Lerna's lake. Hail, Jove's undoubted son, and added grace to heaven and the great author of thy race. Receive the grateful offerings which we pay, and smile propitious on this solemn day. In numbers thus they sung. Above the rest, the den and death of Cacus crown the feast. The woods to hollow vales convey the sound, the vales to hills, and hills the notes rebound. The rites performed, the cheerful train retire. Betwixt young Pallas and his aged sire, the Trojan passed, the city to survey, and pleasing talk beguiled the tedious way. So the story of Hercules' victory has been recounted, and we're told that Potitius was the first to make these rites what they are, and they involve wine and the garlands and all of these things. Evander then puts a twined wreath on his head, and they all do the same. They all drink wine together, and as the sun is going down, they lead this procession in skins of beasts, holding torches in their hands, these tapers. And they eat course after course of food. The Sali are singing with sob and smoke. So they're offering incense, and they all sing songs of all of Hercules' deeds. How when he was a child and Juno tried to kill him, he tied the snakes with his bare hands. How he overthrew these different walls of famous cities, including Troy. How he subdued the centaurs and different monsters. How the bull, the famous bull, he withstood. How he beat the terror of the wood, line 392, which is the Nemean lion, the triple porter of the Stygian seat. This would be Serestus, the three-headed dog. And how he defeated Typhoeus and the unnumbered snake. That would be Typhoeus, the serpentine giant, and the Hydra. How he had victory after victory, how he is worthy of their praises. And then finally, they talk about the victory over Cacus. And the woods and the valleys and the hills all echo with their singing. And so the rites are performed, their celebration of Hercules is over, and Pallas and Evander are going to accompany Aeneas now to look at all of their city, talking as they go, which will beguile, or in this sense, charm the tedious way. Line 412. The stranger cast around his curious eyes, new objects viewing still with new surprise. With greedy joy inquires of various things, and acts and monuments of ancient kings. Then thus the founder of the Roman towers. These woods were first the seat of sylvan powers, of nymphs and fauns and savage men, who took their birth from trunks of trees and stubborn oak. Nor laws they knew, nor manners, nor the care of laboring oxen, or the shining share, nor arts of gain, nor what they gained to spare. Their exercise, the chase, the running flood supplied their thirst, the trees supplied their food. Then Saturn came, who fled the power of Jove, robbed of his realms and banished from above. The men, dispersed on hills, to towns he brought, and laws ordained, and civil customs taught. And Latium called the land, where safe he lay from his unduteous son, and his usurping sway. With his mild empire peace and plenty came, and hence the golden times derived their name.
A more degenerate and discolored age succeeded this, with avarice and rage. The Ausonians then, the bold Sicanians came, and Saturn's empire often changed the name. Then kings, gigantic Tibris and the rest, with arbitrary sway the land oppressed. For Tiber's flood was Albula before, till from the tyrant's fate his name it bore. I last arrived, driven from my native home by fortune's power and fate's resistless doom. Long tossed on seas, I sought this happy land, warned by my mother nymph and called by heaven's command. Thus walking on, he spoke, and shewed the gates, since called Carmental by the Roman state, where stood an altar sacred to the name of old Carmenta, the prophetic dame, who to her son foretold the Aenean race, sublime in fame and Rome's imperial place. Then shews the forest, which in after times fierce Romulus for perpetrated crimes a sacred refuge made. With this the shrine where Pan below the rock had rites divine. Then tells of Argus' death, his murdered guest, whose grave and tomb his innocence attest. Thence to the steep Tarpeian rock he leads, now roofed with gold, then thatched with homely reeds. A reverent fear, such superstition reigns among the rude, even then possessed the swains. Some god they knew, what god they could not tell, did there amidst the sacred horror dwell. The Arcadians thought him Jove, and said they saw the mighty thunderer with majestic awe, who took his shield and dealt his bolts around, and scattered tempests on the teeming ground. Then saw two heaps of ruins, once they stood two stately towns on either side the flood, Saturnia's and Janicula's remains, and either place the founder's name retains. Discoursing thus together, they resort where poor Evander kept his country court. They viewed the ground of Rome's litigious hall, once oxen load, where now the lawyers bawl. Then stooping through the narrow gate they pressed, when thus the king bespoke the Trojan guest. Mean as it is, this palace and this door received Alcides, then a conqueror, dare to be poor, accept our homely food, which feasted him, and emulate a god. Then underneath a lowly roof he led the weary prince, and laid him on a bed. The stuffing leaves with hides of bears o'erspread. All right. So they're walking around the city, and this would be one of those moments the original audience would have said, this is Rome. It'd be like walking around Washington, D.C., and prior to it being built up, this is where the Lincoln Memorial will be. This is where the Washington Monument is, and the White House, and all of these key American sites. But the same thing with Roman sites. And so they see many different things. It starts with Evander talking about how the people who used to live here came from the woods themselves, came from the trees. And then Saturn came, which would be Cronus. Cronus, Saturn, evicted from the heavens by Jupiter, Zeus. And he came here to the savage men and taught them laws and made them towns and called it Latium. And they had this golden period in Latium. But those men were replaced by a more degenerate breed, and the Ausonians came, the bold Sicanians came, and Saturn's empire changed names many times. And so this is all the history which would continue as Rome inherited this place. So there was a gigantic Tibris, a tyrant that ruled the land. And so Albula was the former name of the Tiber flood, the river, but it became Tiber, named after King Tibris. They see the Carmental Gate from former times. They see the forest where Romulus hid when he had committed his crimes. They see the shrine where Pan below the rock had rites divine, line 454. That would be the Lupercal, which would be a very important place in many future Roman events. They see the Tarpeian rock, where executions would have taken place at one point. We're told that this place is now roofed with gold during Virgil's time, but at that point it was just roofed with homely reeds. So we're seeing the ancient past of Rome, how it had these really mean beginnings, but how it became so majestic and great. But this is their foundation. were taken to the Saturnian and Janiculan hills, which were remains of towns founded by Saturn and Janus. We have the litigious hall in line 473, which would be the Roman Forum, where lawyers bawl or shout at each other. And this will be where they end their tour for the day. And so Aeneas is invited in to have a meager feast, Evander freely admits, but it was good enough for Hercules, and so I hope you will enjoy it as well. So then Aeneas lays down on the bed they make for him and goes to sleep.